Despite having that significant advantage in numbers though, the most Kashirika's armies could do was back the humans into a corner for several hundred years. The situation did seem pretty grim plenty of times, but never once did the humans ever admit to being defeated. It was a back and forth conflict that would continue for the greater part of 800 years. What finally shifted the tides though was the single triumphant efforts of the legendary hero Aldebaran. You see, with the ability to take on 10,000 men all by himself, this Golden Knight was more than capable of defeating any demons that he came across. So when it came time for him to finally fight Kashirika, although a winner was never determined, the battle did bring about the end of the war. As for the way that he did that, well, his final attack was one that was so powerful that the sheer force of it was enough to split the great continent in two, resulting in the creation of the Central Continent and Demon Continent. Now, some people believe this warrior to be the human god himself, but the truth of this godlike power is something that will always be a mystery. Even if there are people like Rudius who doubt that a single person is capable of that type of power, the fact remains that the land was still split by it. So, just like how it was with the Holy Sword Highway, perhaps there were individuals whose power was capable of shaping entire continents. In any case, with the humans and demons finally separated, an era of peace would continue for the next 3,000 years or so. Any demons left behind after the war were corralled by the humans and funneled to the Demon Continent. Because the Demon Continent was such a barren land though, to deport these demons was essentially the same thing as condemning them to a life of hardships or even sometimes death. It was definitely one of the more prominent forms of social injustice at the time. The reason none of the other races stepped in to stop it though was simply because they didn't want to spark another war. They would much rather persecute the demons than be put through yet another conflict. So, with all the other races having turned their back on the demons, no matter how much resistance they would give to their new way of life, a world war would never come from it. The rest was simply a matter tended to by time. As the relatively peaceful centuries passed, eventually the demons did become desensitized to their harsh living conditions. But because there was a very limited number of resources, numerous civil wars broke out between countless different demon tribes. The Demon Continent had to become this volatile place in which only the strong could survive. A large number of demons were wiped out because of it, but what remained after were a select few tribes of fierce warriors forged by fire. Now, fast forward again to only 1,000 years ago, and that's when we get to the birth of the demon god Laplace. There may have been many demon kings and emperors before him, but to this day Laplace remains to be the single and only demon god. So, as the only person in 100,000 years to bear such prestigious title, it didn't take long for him to rally the demons and conquer the demon continent, a campaign that's still vividly remembered today. Despite having achieved all that though, Laplace wasn't done with just the demon continent. In the brief span of 500 years, he was now ready to start expanding beyond the Ringus Sea. Of course, that wasn't before first making allies with the Sea Folk and the Beast Folk, but once that was done, he was able to start his invasion of the Central Continent. He had cultivated his empire and groomed his race into this massive army of battle-hardened warriors. So, what Laplace had brought with him to the Central Continent was a war far more brutal than any the humans had ever fought before. It didn't take long for them to be backed into a corner like how it was in the previous war, especially since Laplace had planned his invasion quite ingeniously. By starting his invasion from the south, Laplace was able to funnel a large majority of the humans' military to a single location. He then blocked the retreat back north by sending his worms to make passage through the mountains and lost them. As soon as the humans were confirmed to be stuck, Laplace then sent another unit to attack them at home, not only placing the humans right in the middle of the pincer maneuver, but also scattering them in a disorganized retreat to the west. So, with Laplace now in control of both the south and north, it was only a matter of time until his armies would meet the remaining humans to the west. A grave encounter that would have meant their doom had it not been for one last gamble. With the help of the 7 great heroes, the humans were able to negotiate with the Sea Folk and convince them to lift their blockades over the naval passages. That way the heroes could now travel west to the Millis continent. What awaited them there, though, wasn't a large number of reinforcements like how you'd expect. No. The ones who were in charge of the holy city of Millis were currently the beast folk who were still allied with the demons. So, despite Millis having this robust army of holy knights, they didn't mean much if they couldn't be sent into battle. Thus the reason why the heroes were sent here in the first place. You see, the main purpose of sending these heroes overseas was to persuade the leaders of the beast folk to switch to their side. Of course, history recorded this as some sort of diplomatic effort, effort, but everyone knew that the heroes really just went to the head of each clan and took their children hostage. That was the only way that the heroes could get the beast folk to cooperate. So, with the beast folk now on the human side, when it came time for the decisive battle back home, not only was it the last kingdom of humans fighting against Laplace, but also the 7 heroes, the Holy Knights of Millis, and all the beast folk that they'd threatened into cooperating. This was the force that would be used to assault Laplace's main stronghold. When all was said and done, this violent battle between monolithic superpowers had fortunately ended with victory for the humans. Laplace had been sealed away and his companions defeated, but not before taking out 4 of the 7 heroes first. Of the 3 that remained, there was the Dragon King Udapin, the North God Kalman, and finally the armored Dragon King Perugius. 3 venerable heroes who would go down in history as the 3 legendary demon god slayers. It's not like they actually slayed anything, but the fact remained that their actions did lead to Laplace's defeat. So, with this demonic existence now sealed away from reality, the humans could finally rest and focus on recovery, this time prioritizing peace instead of what they did last time. As a result, not only were treaties signed between the humans and demons, but racial discrimination against the demons was completely prohibited now. It was kind of like the United Declaration of Human Rights from our world. Of course, that didn't prevent every bit of discrimination against the demons, but it did ensure that things remained relatively peaceful, which is why the past 400 years have been mostly uneventful. In any case, that's the darker history behind the world of Mushoku Tensei. What once started out as 7 individual worlds has now been reduced to this single human world. A place that's no longer inhabited by just the humans now, but also all the other races from the worlds destroyed all those millennia ago. That's why the world is filled with so many different and diverse characters. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I got for today. If you're wondering where the next content is, well, that's the video that's gonna come out next week. Because I did miss the last 2 weeks though, I don't think I'm gonna backtrack from where we left off, but instead stay up to date and go straight to this week's episode. I just don't want you guys to miss out on anything from this week's upcoming tournament. Until then though, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!
The life of Saitama, One Punch Man. Saitama is the main protagonist of the series and the titular One Punch Man, and the most powerful being to exist in the series. Saitama faces
Some of you may not know. Whenever you come across a turning point in Mushoku Tensei, that's when you know that something crazy is about to happen. They're these story-defining events that quite literally mark a massive change in the narrative direction. So, when it comes to an episode as crucial as this, I want to make sure that you guys don't miss out on anything. Especially with regards to a conflict as brief yet packed as this one, because every little detail could serve to influence an event that happens later. So, let's take a look at exactly what we missed from this season's turning point. Let's get started. Episode 21, Turning Point 2, covering chapters 8 to 10 of Volume 6. Where we start off at the beginning of the episode is the long path between the Shirane Kingdom and the Asura Kingdom, the last stretch of mountain before Rudy could finally arrive back home. There was the occasional bandit every so often, but compared to the monsters of the Demon Continent, these bandits were a cakewalk. It was nothing more than a chore for Eris to send them packing. As for why bandits were so common here in contrast to everywhere else, well, that was mainly due to the peaceful nature of the region itself. The lack of monsters made it easy for bandits to lay ambushes pretty much anywhere. Plus, with the number of smaller countries currently fighting up north, it was likely that this was causing an increase to their number as well. Now, the exact location where we are in the anime is a continent-wide mountain range known as the Redworm Mountains, the home to the central continent's strongest monster. While one was certainly enough to be a challenge for Ruijin, what made them especially fearsome was their detection ability. No matter how small a person or creature was, if it made the mistake of trespassing into their territory, then these dragons would immediately know and swarm together to kill them. That was one of the most common facts behind it. Some other miscellaneous facts include their ranking as the strongest species of dragon, as well as their vast territory and herd mentality. That being the case, it was only natural for the Redworm Mountains to become known as this impassable mountain range, a place synonymous with death for anyone unlucky enough to traverse there. For all their power and ferocity, The red worms did actually have one single weakness, and that was that their ability to fly wasn't very refined. Yes, they could maneuver themselves well enough while in the air, but it was getting into the air that was the hard part. You see, in order for a worm to be able to take flight, they would have to either jump off a cliff or run down a lengthy slope. Simply flapping their wings just wasn't enough to lift them. That's why you'd never find this species of dragon in the plains or forests. Of course, there was the occasional worm who'd fall from the skies and start wandering the plains, but that was a rare occurrence typically handled by adventurers. It was an S-rank extermination mission that required a party of at least 10. A single dragon was just that tough to handle. What made it quite the coveted quest, though, was the generous reward of 100 gold for completing it. That alone was enough for all 10 members to live lavishly for at least a year. So it was actually quite common for underranked adventurers to try and fail at completing it. Now, in order to traverse these mountains, there were actually two passages through which travelers could cross relatively safely. Small gorges known as the Redworm's lower jaw and upper jaw. Since the lower jaw was the path that connected the south to the west, that's the route that Rudius was heading. It was getting there that required quite the lengthy detour. They could just have cut straight through the mountains like how Eris wanted, but that was an endeavor that even Ruijerd couldn't handle. You see, Eris had a slightly warped perception of just how strong these dragons were. Because Ghislaine had once told her of the time that she'd slain one, Eris now believed that she could too. Well, her together with Rudius and Ruijerd. What Eris was failing to consider about this story, though, was the fact that Ghislaine was with a party of 5. The dragon they were fighting was a grounded straggler separated from its pack, and still 2 of her members ended up dying anyway. So, if just one grounded worm was enough to take on Ghislaine and a party of advanced level sorcerers, then a whole flying swarm was definitely more than enough for them. It was an endeavor that we now know even some of the current 7th grade powers are competent. That's not to say that the current 7th grade powers are weak, but if you go back in time to when the list had people like Laplace in it, then even the lowest ranked power could pass through Red Worm to Red Worm peacefully. That's just how much more powerful the 7th grade powers are. If you're wondering just how much more powerful, well, Laplace did manage to subjugate the king of the Red Worms, so you can probably imagine the level of power that would be needed to do something like that. In any case, it was as Eris and Ruijerd were doing their sparring that Rudius was contemplating the actions of the man god. After careful consideration of all his advice and the events to ensue after, Rudius began to think that perhaps this man god was more trustworthy than he was giving him credit for. You see, the more Rudius considered each situation, the more he started to realize that the man god's advice ensured things would turn out the same way no matter what he did. Whether it was his chance meetings with Aisha and Kashitika, getting saved by Zanaba or Ruijerd, or even just getting captured by the Doldia, all those were positive events that seemed immutable. So perhaps that meant that Rudius could trust him after all. If that was ever going to happen though, Rudius first wanted Hitogami to be a bit more honest with him. He didn't like how this man god's motives were always shrouded by mystery. Switching back to Eris's training now. In the year that passed since their last fight in the Demon Continent, Rudius was no longer confident that he could beat Eris anymore. Sure, he could easily win if he used magic and had a little bit of distance to start, but if he could only use his demon eye like how it was in episode 12, then Rudius now felt that it was impossible. Her skills in combat now surpassed anything that Rudius's demon eye could possibly compensate for. As for the reason why Ruijerd decided to declare her a warrior, well, that was partly because of Rudius. You see, no matter how much time had passed and how much Eris matured, Ruijerd had noticed that Rudius would still treat her like a child. This wasn't something that Rudius saw any particular problem with, but clearly that wasn't the case for Ruijerd. So, as a means of trying to get Rudius to understand, Ruijerd took the initial step to help him get there. It was an unusual gesture that made Rudius feel as if this was some sort of death flag. That being the case, right before the two were about to go to sleep, Rudius made sure to give Ruijerd a good luck charm first. A gold coin for him to keep close for the rest of their travels. Now, it was 4 months after the events in the Shirone Kingdom that Rudius and the others would finally reach the lower jaw, the fateful passage in which the group would encounter their toughest obstacle yet. So, as the 3 of them were riding their carriage down this path, what brought them to a halt was a simple question from the man who would later introduce himself as Orsted, a strange person who both Eris and Ruijerd seemed to be utterly fearful of. While Rudius saw him as just a person with intimidating eyes though, it was actually the young girl beside him that he was most interested by. Something about her ashen brown hair and pure white mask just made her image extremely easy to remember. Before he could inspect these two any further though, The countless splinters of Orsted's image went to make the whole thing even more strange. Then, the more questions Orsted began to ask about who they were, the more Rudius began to get the feeling that perhaps this man was friendly. There was something about the way he talked that just made him seem satisfied, almost like he was happy to be reuniting with some old friends from the past. Of course, neither Ruijerd nor Eris knew who he was, but that didn't stop Orsted from expressing his content in seeing them alive and well. That said, because the two weren't showing any change in their hostile demeanor, Orsted simply decided to leave them be. It was as he was turning to leave, though, that Orsted would part with a couple more interesting lines. In addition to saying that he'd stay out of their way, he also went on to mention that they'd eventually come to know him. A statement spoken with such utter confidence that it was almost like it was implying that this was some sort of inevitable truth. It was for this very reason that Rudius's intuition began to tell him that Orsted knew something that the others didn't. Something that only an existence akin to the man god would know. That was the vibe that Rudius was currently getting from him. So, with a sudden urge to figure out what this man knew, Rudius turned and made the biggest mistake of his life. He called out and began the conversation we see in the anime. Had Rudius not done this, then Orsted wouldn't have contemplated why he had no memory of ever meeting him, and he also wouldn't have noticed the lack of fear from him either. Two key clues that went to indicate that perhaps this strange child could be affiliated with the man god. That being the case, the nonchalant manner that Orsted previously held with Ruijerd and Eris had now switched to a more cautious and distant one, leading Orsted to ask the final question which would seal Rudius's fate. Now, the reason why Rudius responded in such a prompt manner was partly because he let his guard down thinking the conversation was over, but mostly because this was the only sense that Orsted had made the entire time. You see, because the man god was something that Rudius had never talked about, the sudden mention of his name from such a confusing character had made Rudy impulsively want to continue the conversation. He instinctively felt like this was some knowledge that they could both share together. So, out of a pure natural reaction, Rudy would speak the words that would spur Orsted into action, leading to the incredible display of combat we saw in the anime. If we start from the very beginning, the initial fight between Ruijerd and Orsted was so one-sided that the entire thing didn't even last for more than 10 seconds. It's not like Orsted was that much faster, but it was the way he moved that just made it seem that way. With every motion Ruijerd would make, Orsted would make a slightly better one to give him the advantage. It was a constant cycle in which the longer it went, the worse it would become for Ruijerd and the closer Orsted would be to completing his trap. So, as Ruijerd's balance worsened and his attacks slowed, the massive gap in experience became all the more apparent. Everything about Orsted's strategy just seemed perfect, much to the point that if there was an optimal approach to combat, then this would be a prime example of it. His movements were minimal yet effective, his positioning invited the exact attacks that he wanted, then his counters led Ruijerd right to the moment that he had planned for. It was a fight that was over before it had even begun. There were no options left for Ruijerd other than to fall for the trap that Orsted had laid for him. When Eris had charged in to fight Orsted next, what's important to note is the technique that he had used to stop her. This was the defensive water god technique called Flow, a more polished version of the one that Paul had once used on Rudius. By gently redirecting Eris's sword with the palm of his hand, Orsted was able to send Eris flying. It was a single fluid motion that highlighted every aspect of the water god style's value. Now, when we see Rudius pat down every part of his body next, this was actually due to the vision from his demon eye. He had just foreseen his lungs, heart, throat, and head all get crushed. A vivid scene that he could only compare to a fatality from a fighting game. So, as he checked to see if all were still there, Orsted's first attack went straight for the lungs. You see, because he knew that Rudius was some sort of magician, Orsted had opted to eliminate any chance of retaliation by collapsing his lungs. An impact that not only fractured 6 of his ribs, but also guaranteed Rudius's death since he couldn't cast healing magic anymore. But rather than simply lay over and die, Rudius instead kept thinking on how to fight back. His only thought was of how if he was to die here, then Orsted would surely go back and finish off the other two. So, what we saw first was the use of the fastest stone cannon that Rudius could conjure, followed by the most explosive fireball that he could imagine. On his initial attempt at casting it, though, Orsted had used his disturbed magic to interrupt it. By aiming his right hand towards the source of Rudius's mana, he had managed to effectively seal away Rudius's ability to gather any. Well, the ability to gather any with his right hand anyway. Since this disturbed magic seemed to only work on a single target location, that meant that Rudius could still make use of his left hand. an option that Orsted didn't even try to consider since the ability to simultaneously use multiple different schools of magic was somewhat unknown to him, especially when it came to casting them without an incantation. So, when Orsted tried to imitate it himself, although he did do it successfully on his first try, he did also mention how it was more difficult than he expected. Rudius's unique approach to spellcasting had actually gone to impress him. Now, on the second attempt at this fireball, what Rudius had gone to imagine was something akin to a nuke. His mind was already so far gone that he didn't even consider the possibility of Eris and Ruijerd getting caught up in it. All his focus was simply centered on this one final attack, an enormous ball of flame that was supposed to leave behind a mushroom cloud. What's interesting to note after, though, is that even after Orsted had blocked this massive attack, he was still very cautious over what Rudius's next move could be. Just the fact that he hadn't yet healed his lungs only went to make Orsted think that perhaps Rudius was trying to get him to lower his guard. He truly believed that there was something more to this so-called apostle. It was the instant their eyes had met, though, that Orsted finally understood Rudius was only skilled at magic. Whatever more he was expecting from this disciple of Hitogami certainly wasn't going to be seen from Rudius. He wasn't even capable of coding himself in battle aura. So, when all was said and done, Orsted was actually left feeling quite a bit disappointed. He just couldn't understand why the man god would bother with a pawn who was so apparently weak. In any case, the only other line that we missed from the rest of the encounter was a single heavy statement directed from Orsted to Eris. After seeing just how important Rudius was to her, not only did Orsted apologize for doing what he did, but he also made sure to say that she'd understand why one day, almost as if to imply that this was a necessary and unavoidable outcome. But yeah, that was the whole conflict as it happened in the novels. When we get to the conversation with Hitogami after, there wasn't much we missed out on other than a small discussion regarding Orsted's curses. You see, Rudius had actually begun to sympathize with him. As someone who knew what it was like to be hated by everyone around him, Rudius understood why Orsted would become this existence that wants to destroy the world. Now, that's not to say that this is his actual motive, but Hitogami does identify this as Orsted's objective. It was something that Rudius could personally understand since his past life had led him to that exact same way of thinking. Now, aside from that, the last thing worth mentioning is the significance of the girl with Orsted. There was something about her that Rudius just found familiar. He wasn't sure where he'd heard her name before, but what he was sure of was the fact that he'd heard of it at least once before. Sometime in the past year, Rudius was certain that he'd heard it mentioned. He just couldn't remember exactly where or when. But yeah, that was everything that we missed from Turning Point 2. A very eventful episode in which we can only wait to see the aftermath. Though we don't know what direction the story will go next, it probably won't be anything close to the casual adventure story that we got this season. So you can definitely expect the next 2 episodes to bring about a lot of changes. But anyway, that's pretty much everything that I got for today. If you want to know more of my personal opinion, then I think I'm going to start doing post-episode discussions on Twitch. So if you want to know what I think of the upcoming episodes, then be sure to follow on Twitch and see those potential streams on Sunday. Until then though, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao! When it comes to a
Really? You find it difficult? That dark hair.
Ira, there you are. Come along.
Of course.
'Twould seem you've regained your composure. In that case, I am Kyle, the Crown Prince of Salutania. Welcome to my kingdom. If it's not too bold, may I ask your name, please?
My name is Misuna Aira. Aira's my given name. Can I ask how exactly I got here?
We called you, utilizing our ancient saint summoning ritual.
What's that?
Damien?
Allow me to explain. Our kingdom faces unprecedented danger. Terrible monsters birthed from a dark miasma
Wait,
ravage the land and threaten to
Monsters?
destroy us. Only the
What the
saint
heck
can
is a
drive them out.
miasma?
The saint possesses
I don't
special
get it.
powers that can destroy
I
monsters
literally
and
don't
cleanse the
understand a
miasma.
word he's
We
saying.
depend upon her for our safety.
Am I like
She is
in a
crucial to our
manga?
survival. However, no saint has appeared in our age, so following with tradition, we decided to use a ritual devised by ancient mages to summon a woman with the
Nope.
necessary qualities.
It's
It was our
really
only
happening.
Therefore, my duty as the future king of Salutania was to address the crisis we faced. So I called for summoning to be carried out.
If
Yes? If what?
if I do somehow kill all the monsters, then can I go back home?
I don't believe I've ever read any accounts of the saint returning to her world.
You're saying I can never go home then?
How is Ira now?
It seems she finally cried herself to sleep, Your Highness.
I see. Damien,
Sir,
you will become the next Prime Minister once your father's gone. Tell me, would you die for your king?
yes, if he so commanded it.
As I thought. I would do the same. That is our lot in life. And no one else's. But never mind that. I've signed the necessary documents. I'll leave the rest to you.
It will be done.
Lady Ira, which of your gowns would you like to wear today? Lady Ira?
Yes, sorry.
Might I suggest this one, my lady?
Yes, that is quite lovely.
See? I think the sweet little cutesy one looks best on you, Ira. Oh, you're just so adorable! Yep, that's the one.
You look wonderful, honey.
Thanks, Dad.
You look wonderful. You do. I knew that color would suit you.
Well, thank you very much.
Do you find you still lack anything?
No, not particularly. I've been given clothes and a room, and I'm being fed well. Everyone's been so kind to me, too.
As they should be. You are the saint, after all.
Right, well, about that. It still doesn't seem quite real to me yet.
Does it not?
Oh, what's...
Read him in the weeds, damn it all! I'll be taking that coin.
Guys, get back to your posts. Prince Kyle is making his rounds.
You're kidding! workmen.
All right, let's get back to it then.
I wonder, do people not like him?
What do you think of Salutania?
Beautiful. And lively. It's a lovely place, Your Highness.
Oftentimes a bit too lively, I'd say, which can be somewhat troublesome.
It is part of our duties, ensuring proper social discipline.
Sorry?
In simpler terms, we must sometimes be strict with the kingdom's people to uphold the kingdom's peace. Though, as you can imagine, that does not endear us to its citizens.
Oh, I see.
Yet the prince, he endures and keeps leading.
This kingdom, I think it's wonderful.
I truly hope you come to love it as I do in time.
I'm sure I will, Your Highness.
When all this is over, I will search for a way to return you to your home. However, I can't promise that I'll succeed. I beg of you, please lend this kingdom your power. I want to keep our land and its people safe. I must.
Please, Your Highness. You don't have to do that. Oh, I get it now. Yes, he's extremely self-centered. That's true. And awkward. But at least he's direct. Please, Prince Kyle. I admit, I still can't wrap my head around what it means to be the saint. But I'll commit to doing whatever I must to help. I'll do my best for you.
Unreal.
Yes. Good.
Just incredible.
Twould seem your studies are going well.
Oh, really? That's good. I couldn't tell if they were. I'm having a blast learning magic.
Glad to hear it. You'll be assisting on future monster hunting expeditions.
On my own? With them?
No, we'll be there with you, of course. You need not worry. You'll have me, Damien, all the others. We'll keep you safe. Tell me, does that help?
I'm really not sure. I don't know what my deal is. But,
Yes?
like I told you before, I'll do it. That's why I was summoned here.
You're going to be a most remarkable saint. And I will prove it to them. One and all, please help me to save this kingdom from destruction.
Yes, I'll really try!
We've warned you about this a dozen times, yet you still insist on doing it.
Prince Kyle has a fiancée. That means they're betrothed. Could it be you really don't understand what you're doing to her? You're with him constantly.
Not to mention the other boys. Have you any concept of
I
what
beg
it
your
means?
pardon. You leave her alone.
Prince Kyle.
Come along, Ira.
Coming.
Good day. Oh, waiting out the rain?
Yes, I'm ashamed to admit I've forgotten my umbrella.
You can join us under ours if you'd like.
No, I couldn't impose.
Oh, please, I do insist.
No, really, that's kind, but I wouldn't want to crowd you.
Well, too late. You're already here. All right, shall we? Yes, let's. How lucky for you that we happened to be passing by. Indeed. Oh, how did you fare on that exam today?
Not very well, I'm afraid, but what can you do?
My, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Lady Ira! My word.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, it's just water, right? Look. All better. See?
Oh, forgive me. I've never seen anyone wield magic in such a precise manner. Incredible. You truly are completely dry.
Well, I didn't quite get all of it off. It's just... I've noticed my hair and skin kind of drying out since I got here. So I thought if I left a little bit of moisture, it might, like, help with that.
This report is so astounding that its contents seem nothing more than desperate falsehoods.
Indeed. Like that bit about her magic healing lost limbs. Impossible.
And there's more. The House of Count Valdek, the House of Margrave Hawk, the House of Marquis Drevis. All powerful families stepping in together to provide her patronage. I turned my back on her because of the way she looked. Like some sort of servant or a wet nurse. Well beneath me. Why would a prince address her?
Your Highness, forgive me, but it would do you well to learn about otherworldly cultures.
Yes, I know! It was a mistake. Born out of my own stubborn pride. But admitting that now is dangerous. It could trigger another quarrel over my succession.
The second prince would very likely approach those aforementioned noble houses, if necessary.
Most importantly, what happens to Ira if she's not the saint?
Well, even if she isn't the one, surely the kingdom could find use for her, seeing as she does come from another world.
So she'd live her life as a captive in the palace. I don't know. Would Ira even want such a thing?
Doubtful, Highness. There's no place for her in high society.
It was a rhetorical question. I know the answer. She had a home and a place where she belonged. I took that. As such, I'll find her a new place to call home. That's my duty as the future king.
What do you plan to do then?
Nothing yet. For now, I'll go on as planned. That's the way. I'll keep playing the role of incompetent, stubborn prince. After witnessing all my reckless behavior with Ira, the court will take pity on her.
Now I understand.
It will cause you some trouble, though.
Your Highness, handling trouble is my duty as your future Prime Minister.
May I have a moment? Huh? I don't believe we've spoken before. My name is Elizabeth Ashley, and I'm betrothed to Prince Kyle. As I'm sure many other young ladies have already warned you, it truly doesn't reflect favorably upon you to be so close to a man with a fiancée. So, I thought, if you'd be comfortable with it, might I join you?
What are you doing?
Highness.
Elizabeth, what business do you have with Ira?
Begging your pardon, I only wish to speak with her for a moment.
That's all?
Yes, of course. Since Lady Ira always studies with you and your friends after classes are done, I thought I might offer her my assistance with her studies as well, if she'd like.
No need. I will keep looking after Ira myself. Was there anything else?
Ah, finally! There you are! I've been looking for you, my brother.
Oh, Prince Rain! Good day to you.
What's wrong?
Nothing too terrible. The professor would like a word with you about next week's expedition.
Very well. Ira, let us go.
What unfortunately poor timing.
I genuinely only wish to help her, but he absolutely refuses to listen.
That seems to be the case with anything that happens regarding the Lady Ira. Oddly enough, I've been hearing rumors that the other woman who was summoned is believed to be the true saint. How will they all react when one woman is recognized and the other is not?
I have asked Say for her thoughts, but alas.
Oh, wait, Liz, are you saying you've met this saint woman?
Indeed. We've become fast friends over the past few months. Honestly, I'd like to befriend Lady Ira one day, too. So I thought, if it's all right, I might join you. If she'd been allowed to keep talking, then maybe we could have become friends. Next time I see her, I'll say hi. Even if I do it wrong, and even if I'm awkward, I can still be direct.